The Inimitable Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. This book was originally published in Britain in 1923. This unabridged recording is read by Frederick Davidson. This book is 244 pages long. Chapter 1. Jeeves exerts the old cerebellum. "Morning, Jeeves," I said. "Good morning, sir," said Jeeves. He put the good old cup of tea softly on the table by my bed, and I took a refreshing sip. Just right, as usual. Not too hot, not too sweet, not too weak, not too strong, not too much milk, and not a drop spilled in the saucer. A most amazing cove, Jeeves. So dashed competent in every respect. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I mean to say, take just one small instance. Every other valet I've ever had used to barge into my room in the morning while I was still asleep, causing much misery. But Jeeves seems to know when I'm awake by a sort of telepathy. He always floats in with the cup exactly 2 minutes after I come to life. Makes a deuce of a lot of difference to a fellow's day. How's the weather, Jeeves?" "Exceptionally clement, sir." "Anything in the papers?" "Some slight friction threatening in the Balkans, sir. Otherwise, nothing." "I say, Jeeves, a man I met at the club last night told me to put my shirt on privateer for the 2 o'clock race this afternoon. How about it?" "I should not advocate it, sir. The stable is not sanguine." That was enough for me. Jeeves knows. How, I couldn't say, but he knows. There was a time when I would laugh lightly and go ahead, and lose my little all against his advice. But not now. "Talking of shirts," I said, "have those mauve ones I ordered arrived yet?" "Yes, sir. I sent them back." "Sent them back?" "Yes, sir. They would not have become you." Well, I must say I'd thought fairly highly of those shirtings, but I bowed to superior knowledge. Weak? I don't know. Most fellows, no doubt, are all for having their valets confine their activities to creasing trousers and what-not, without trying to run the home, but it's different with Jeeves. Right from the first day he came to me, I've looked on him as a sort of a guide, philosopher, and friend. "Mr. Little rang up on the telephone a few moments ago, sir. I informed him that you were not yet awake." "Did he leave a message?" "No, sir. He mentioned that he had a matter of importance to discuss with you, but confided no details." "Oh, well, I expect I shall be seeing him at the club." "No doubt, sir." I wasn't what you might call in a fever of impatience. Bingo Little is a chap I was at school with, and we see a lot of each other still. He's the nephew of old Mortimer Little, who retired from business recently with a goodish pile. You've probably heard of Little's liniment. It limbers up the legs. Bingo biffs about London on a pretty comfortable allowance given him by his uncle, and leads on the whole a fairly unclouded life. It wasn't likely that anything which he described as a matter of importance would turn out to be really so frightfully important. I took it that he discovered some new brand of cigarette which he wanted me to try, or something like that, and didn't spoil my breakfast by worrying. After breakfast I lit a cigarette and went to the open window to inspect the day. It certainly was one of the best and brightest. "Jeeves," I said. "Sir," said Jeeves. He had been clearing away the breakfast things, but at the sound of the young master's voice cheesed it courteously. "You are absolutely right about the weather. It is a juicy morning." "Decidedly, sir." "Spring and all that?" "Yes, sir." "In the spring, Jeeves, a livelier iris gleams upon the burnished dove." "So I have been informed, sir." "Right-ho. Then bring me my wangy, my yellowest shoes, and the old green Homburg. I'm going into the park to do pastoral dances." I don't know if you know that sort of feeling you get on these days round about the end of April and the beginning of May, when the skies are light blue with cotton-wool clouds and there's a bit of a breeze blowing from the west. Kind of uplifted feeling. Romantic, if you know what I mean. I'm not much of a ladies' man, but on this particular morning it seemed to me that what I really wanted was some charming girl to buzz up and ask me to save her from assassins or something. So it was a bit of an anticlimax when I merely ran into young Bingo Little, looking perfectly foul in a crimson satin tie decorated with horseshoes. "Hello, Bertie," said Bingo. "My God, man," I gargled. "The cravat! The gent's neckwear! Why? For what reason?" "Oh, the tie?" He blushed. I was given it." He seemed embarrassed, so I dropped the subject. We toddled along a bit and sat down on a couple of chairs by the Serpentine. "Jeeves tells me you want to talk to me about something," I said. "Eh?" said Bingo with a start. "Oh, yes. Yes. I waited for him to unleash the topic of the day, but he didn't seem to want to get going. Conversation languished. He stared straight ahead of him in a glassy sort of manner. "I say, Bertie," he said after a pause of about an hour and a quarter. "Hello." "Do you like the name Mabel?" "No." "No?" "No." "You don't think there's a kind of music in the word, like the wind rustling gently through the treetops?" "No." He seemed disappointed for a moment, then cheered up. "Of course you wouldn't. You always were a fat-headed worm without any soul, weren't you?" "Just as you say. Who is she? Tell me all." For I realized now that poor old Bingo was going through it once again. Ever since I've known him, and we were at school together, he has been perpetually falling in love with someone, generally in the spring, which seems to act on him like magic. At school he had the finest collection of actresses' photographs of anyone of his time, and at Oxford his romantic nature was a byword. "You'd better come along and meet her at lunch," he said, looking at his watch. "A ripe suggestion," I said. "Where are you meeting her? At the Ritz?" "Near the Ritz." He was geographically accurate. About 50 yards east of the Ritz, there's one of those blighted tea and bun shops you see dotted about all over London. And into this, if you'll believe me, young Bingo dived like a homing rabbit, and before I had time to say a word, we were wedged in at a table on the brink of a silent pool of coffee left there by an early luncher. I'm bound to say I couldn't quite follow the development of the scenario. Bingo, while not absolutely rolling in the stuff, has always had a fair amount of the ready. Apart from what he got from his uncle, I knew that he'd finished up the jumping season well on the right side of the ledger. Why, then, was he lunching the girl at this god-forsaken eatery? Couldn't be because he was hard up. Just then the waitress arrived. Rather a pretty girl. "Aren't we going to wait?" I started to say to Bingo, thinking it somewhat thick that, in addition to asking a girl to lunch with him in a place like this, he should fling himself on the foodstuffs before she turned up, when I caught sight of his face and stopped. The man was goggling. His entire map was suffused with a rich blush. He looked like the soul's awakening done in pink. "Hello, Mabel," he said with a sort of gulp. "Hello," said the girl. "Mabel," said Bingo, "this is Bertie Wooster, a pal of mine." "Pleased to meet you," she said. "Nice morning." "Fine," I said. "You see, I'm wearing the tie," said Bingo. "Suits you beautiful," said the girl. Personally, if anyone had told me that a tie like that suited me, I should have risen and struck him on the mazard, regardless of his age and sex. Poor old Bingo simply got all flustered with gratification and smirked in the most gruesome manner. "Well, what's it going to be today?" asked the girl, introducing the business touch into the conversation. Bingo studied the menu devoutly. "I'll have a cup of cocoa, cold veal and ham pie, a slice of fruitcake and a macaroon. Same for you, Bertie?" I gazed at the man revolted. That he could have been a pal of mine all these years and think me capable of insulting the old tum with this sort of stuff cut me to the quick. "Or how about a bit of hot steak pudding, with a sparkling limado to wash it down?" said Bingo. You know, the way love can change a fellow is really frightful to contemplate. This chappie before me, who spoke in that absolutely careless way of macaroons and limado, was the man I'd seen in happier days telling the head waiter at Claridge's exactly how he wanted the chef to prepare the sole frito gourmet aux champignons, and saying he would jolly well sling it back if it wasn't just right. Ghastly. Ghastly. A roll and butter and a small coffee seemed the only thing on the list that hadn't been specially prepared by the nastier-minded members of the Borgia family for people they had a particular grudge against. So I chose them, and Mabel hopped it. "Well," said Bingo rapturously. I took it that he wanted my opinion of the female poisoner who just left us. "Very nice," I said. He seemed dissatisfied. "You don't think she's the most wonderful girl you ever saw?" he said wistfully. "Oh, absolutely," I said to appease the blighter. "Where did you meet her?" "At a subscription dance at Camberwell." "What on earth were you doing at a subscription dance at Camberwell?" "Your man Jeeves asked me if I'd buy a couple of tickets. It was in aid of some charity or other. Jeeves? I didn't know he went in for that sort of thing. Well, I suppose he has to relax a bit every now and then. Anyway, he was there, swinging a dashed efficient shoe. I hadn't meant to go at first, but I turned out for a lark. Oh, Bertie, think what I might have missed. What might you have missed? I asked, the old lemon being slightly clouded. Mabel, you chump! If I hadn't gone, I shouldn't have met Mabel. Oh, At this point, Bingo fell into a species of trance, and came out of it only to wrap himself round the pie and macaroon. Bertie, he said, I want your advice. Carry on. Or at least not your advice, because that wouldn't be much good to anybody. I mean, you're a pretty consummate old ass, aren't you? Not that I want to hurt your feelings, of course. No, I see that. What I wish you would do is to put the whole thing to that fellow Jeeves of yours and see what he suggests. You've often told me that he's helped other pals of yours out of messes, and what you tell me is by way of being the brains of the family. He's never let me down yet. Then put my case to him. What case? My problem. What problem? Why, you poor fish, my uncle, of course. What do you think my uncle's going to say to all this? If I sprang it on him cold, he'd tie himself in knots on the hearthrug. One of these emotional Johnnies, eh? Somehow or other his mind has got to be prepared to receive the news, but how? That's a lot of help, that You see, I'm pretty well dependent on the old boy. If he cuts off my allowance, I should be very much in the soup. So you put the whole binge to Jeeves and see if he can't scare up a happy ending somehow. Tell him my future is in his hands, and that if the wedding bells ring out, he can rely on me, even under half my kingdom. Well, call it 10 quid. Jeeves would exert himself with 10 quid on the horizon. What? Undoubtedly, I said. I wasn't in the least surprised at Bingo wanting to lug Jeeves into his private affairs like this. It was the first thing I'd have thought of doing myself if I'd been in any hole of any description. As I have frequently had occasion to observe, he is a bird of the ripest intellect, full of bright ideas. If anybody could fix things for poor old Bingo, he could. I stated the case to him that night after dinner. Jeeves, sir, are you busy just now? No, sir. I mean, not doing anything in particular. No, sir, it is my practice at this hour to read some improving book. But if you desire my services, this can easily be postponed or indeed abandoned altogether. Well, I want your advice. It's about Mr. Little. Young Mr. Little, sir, or the elder Mr. Little, his uncle, who lives in Pounceby Gardens? Jeeves seemed to know everything. Most amazing thing. I'd been pally with Bingo practically all my life, and yet I didn't remember ever having heard that his uncle lived anywhere in particular. How did you know he lived in Pounceby Gardens? I said. I am on terms of some intimacy with the elder Mr. Little's cook, sir. In fact, there is an understanding. I'm bound to say that this gave me a bit of a start. Somehow I'd never thought of Jeeves going in for that sort of thing. Do you mean you're engaged? It may be said to amount to that, sir. Well. She is a remarkably excellent cook, sir, said Jeeves, as though he felt called on to give some explanation. What was it you wished to ask me about Mr. Little? I sprang the details on him. And that's how the matter stands, Jeeves, I said. I think we ought to rally round a trifle and help poor old Bingo put the thing through. Tell me about old Mr. Little. What sort of chap is he? A somewhat curious character, sir. Since retiring from business he has become a great recluse, and now devotes himself almost entirely to the pleasures of the table. Greedy hog, you mean? I would not perhaps take the liberty of describing him in precisely those terms, sir. He's what is usually called a gourmet, very particular about what he eats, and for that reason sets a high value on Miss Watson's services. The cook? Yes, sir. Well, it looks to me as though our best plan would be to shoot young Bingo in on him after dinner one night. Melting mood, I mean to say, and all that. The difficulty is, sir, that at the moment Mr. Little is on a diet, owing to an attack of gout. Things begin to look wobbly. No, sir, I fancy that the elder Mr. Little's misfortune may be turned to the younger Mr. Little's advantage. I was speaking only the other day to Mr. Little's valet, and he was telling me that it has become his principal duty to read to Mr. Little in the evenings. If I were in your place, sir, I should send young Mr. Little to read to his uncle. Nephew's devotion, you mean? Old man, touched by kindly action? What? Partly that, sir, but I would rely more on young Mr. Little's choice of literature. That's no good. Jolly old Bingo has a kind face, but when it comes to literature he stops at the Sporting Times. That difficulty may be overcome. I would be happy to select books for Mr. Little to read. Perhaps I might explain my idea further. I can't say I quite grasp it yet. The method which I advocate is what I believe the advertisers call a direct suggestion, sir, consisting as it does of driving an idea home by constant repetition. You may have had experience of the system. You mean they keep on telling you that some soap or other is the best, and after a bit you come under the influence and charge round the corner and buy a cake? Exactly, sir. The same method was the basis of all the most valuable propaganda during the recent war. I see no reason why it should not be adopted to bring about the desired results with regard to the subject's views on class distinctions. If young Mr. Little were to read day after day to his uncle a series of narratives in which marriage with young persons of an inferior social status was held up as both feasible and admirable, I fancy it would prepare the elder Mr. Little's mind for the reception of the information that his nephew wishes to marry a waitress in a tea-shop. Are there any books of that sort nowadays? The only ones I ever see mentioned in the papers are about married couples who find life grey and can't stick each other at any price. Yes, sir, there are a great many, neglected by the reviewers, but widely read. You have never encountered All for Love by Rosie M. Banks? No. Nor A Red, Red Summer Rose by the same author? No. I have an aunt, sir, who owns an almost complete set of Rosie M. Banks. I could easily borrow as many volumes as young Mr. Little might require. They make very light, attractive reading. Well, it's worth trying. I should certainly recommend the scheme, sir. All right, then. Toddle round to your aunt's tomorrow and grab a couple of the fruitiest. We can but have a dash at it. Precisely, sir. Chapter 2. No wedding bells for Bingo. Bingo reported 3 days later that Rosie M. Banks was the goods, and beyond a question the stuff to give the troops. Old Little had jibbed somewhat at first on the proposed change of literary diet, he not being much of a lad for fiction, and having stuck hitherto exclusively to the heavier monthly reviews. But Bingo had got Chapter 1 of All for Love past his guard before he knew what was happening, and after that there was nothing to it. Since then they'd finished A Red, Red Summer Rose, Madcap Myrtle, and Only a Factory Girl, and were halfway through The Courtship of Lord Strathmorlick. Bingo told me all this in a husky voice over an egg beaten up in sherry. The only blot on the thing from his point of view was that it wasn't doing a bit of good to the old vocal cords, which were beginning to show signs of cracking under the strain. He'd been looking his symptoms up in a medical dictionary, and he thought he had got clergyman's throat. But against this you had to set the fact that he was making an undoubted hit in the right quarter, and also that after the evening's reading he always stayed on to dinner. And from what he told me, the dinners turned out by old Little's cook had to be tasted to be believed. There were tears in the old blighter's eyes as he got on the subject of the clear soup. I suppose to a fellow who for weeks had been tackling macaroons and limado, it must have been like heaven. Old Little wasn't able to give any practical assistance at these banquets, but Bingo said that he came to the table and had his whack of arrowroot, and sniffed the dishes, and told stories of entrees he'd had in the past, and sketched out scenarios of what he was going to do to the bill of fare in the future, when the doctor put him in shape. So I suppose he enjoyed himself, too, in a way. Anyhow, things seemed to be buzzing along quite satisfactorily, and Bingo said he'd got an idea which he thought was going to clinch the thing. He wouldn't tell me what it was, but he said it was a pippin. "We make progress, Jeeves," I said. "That is very satisfactory, sir." "Mr. Little tells me that when he came to the big scene in Only a Factory Girl, his uncle gulped like a stricken bullpup." "Indeed, sir." "Where Lord Claude takes the girl in his arms, you know, and says, 'I am familiar with the passage, sir. It is distinctly moving.'" "It was a great favourite of my aunt's." "I think we're on the right track." "It would seem so, sir." "In fact, this looks like being another of your successes. I've always said, and I always shall say, that for sheer brain, Jeeves, you stand alone, All the other great thinkers of the age are simply in the crowd, watching you go by." "Thank you very much, sir. I endeavour to give satisfaction." About a week after this, Bingo blew in with the news that his uncle's gout had ceased to trouble him, and that on the morrow he would be back at the old stand working away with knife and fork as before. "And by the way," said Bingo, "he wants you to lunch with him tomorrow." "Me? Why me? He doesn't know I exist." "Oh, yes, he does. I've told him about you." "What have you told him?" "Oh, various things. Anyway, he wants to meet you. And take my tip, laddie, you go. I should think lunch tomorrow would be something special." I don't know why it was, but even then it struck me that there was something dashed odd, almost sinister, if you know what I mean, about young Bingo's manner. The old egg had the air of one who has something up his sleeve. "There's more in this than meets the eye," I said. "Why should your uncle ask a fellow to lunch whom he's never seen?" "My dear old fathead, haven't I just said that I've been telling him all about you, that you're my best pal, at school together and all that sort of thing?" "But even then... And another thing, why are you so dash keen on my going?" Bingo hesitated for a moment. "Well, I told you I'd got an idea. This is it. I want you to spring the news on him. I haven't the nerve myself." "What?" "I'm hanged if I do." "And you call yourself a pal of mine?" "Yes, I know, but there are limits." "Bertie," said Bingo reproachfully, "I saved your life once." "When?" "Didn't I? It must have been some other fella then. Well, anyway, we were boys together and all that. You can't let me down." "Oh, all right," I said. "But when you say you haven't nerve enough for any dash thing in the world, you misjudge yourself. A fellow—" "Cheerio," said young Bingo. 1:30 tomorrow. Don't be late." I'm bound to say that the more I contemplated the binge, the less I liked it. It was all very well for Bingo to say that I was slated for a magnificent lunch, but what good is the best possible lunch to a fellow if he's slung out into the street in his ear during the soup course? However, the word of a Wooster is his bond and all that sort of rot. So at 1:30 the next day I tottered up the steps of number 16 Pounceby Gardens and punched the bell. And half a minute later I was up in the drawing-room, shaking hands with the fattest man I've ever seen in my life. The motto of the little family was evidently variety. Young Bingo is long and thin and hasn't had a superfluous ounce on him since we first met. But the uncle restored the average and a bit over. The hand which grasped mine wrapped it round and enfolded it, till I began to wonder if I'd ever get it out without excavating machinery. "Mr. Wooster, I am gratified. I am proud. I am honoured." It seemed to me that young Bingo must have boosted me to some purpose. "Oh, I said. He stepped back a bit, still hanging on to the good right hand. "You are very young to have accomplished so much." I couldn't follow the train of thought. The family, especially my Aunt Agatha, who has savaged me incessantly from childhood up, have always rather made a point of the fact that mine is a wasted life, and that since I won the prize at my first school for the best collection of wildflowers made during the summer holidays, I haven't done a damn thing to land me on the nation's scroll of fame. I was wondering if he couldn't have got me mixed up with someone else, when the telephone bell rang outside in the hall and the maid came in to say that I was wanted. I buzzed down and found it was young Bingo. "Hello," said young Bingo. "So you've got there. Good man. I knew I could rely on you. I say, old crumpet, did my uncle seem pleased to see you?" "Absolutely all over me. I can't make it out." "Oh, that's all right. I just rang up to explain. Fact is, old man, I know you won't mind, but I told him that you were the author of those books I've been reading to him." "What?" "Yes, I said that Rosie M. Banks was your pen name, and you didn't want it generally known because you were a modest, retiring sort of chap. He listened to you now. Absolutely hang on your words. A brightish idea, what? I doubt if Jeeves in person could have thought up a better one than that. Well, pitch it strong, old lad, and keep steadily before you the fact that I must have my allowance raised. I can't possibly marry on what I've got now. If this film is to end with a slow fade-out on the embrace, at least double is indicated. Well, that's that. Cheerio." And he rang off. At that moment the gong sounded, and the genial host came tumbling downstairs, like the delivery of a ton of coals. I always look back to that lunch with a sort of aching regret. It was the lunch of a lifetime, and I wasn't in a fit state to appreciate it. Subconsciously, if you know what I mean. I could see it was pretty special, but I had got the wind up to such a frightful extent over the ghastly situation in which young Bingo had landed me, that its deeper meaning never really penetrated. Most of the time I might have been eating sawdust for all the good it did me. Old Little struck the literary note right from the start. "My nephew has probably told you that I've been making a close study of your books of late," he began. Yes, he did mention it. How did you like the bally things?" He gazed reverently at me. "Mr. Wooster, I'm not ashamed to say that the tears came into my eyes as I listened to them. It amazes me that a man as young as you can have been able to plumb human nature so surely to its depths, to play with so unerring a hand on the quivering heartstrings of your reader, to write novels so true, so human, so moving, so vital. It's just a knack," I said. The good old persp was bedewing my forehead by this time in a pretty lavish manner. I don't know when I've been so rattled. "Do you find the room a trifle warm?" Oh, no, rather not just right." "Then it's the pepper. If my cook has a fault, which I'm not prepared to admit, it is that she is inclined to stress the pepper a trifle in her made dishes. By the way, do you like her cooking?" I was so relieved that we got off the subject of my literary output that I shouted approval in a ringing baritone. "I'm delighted to hear it, Mr. Wooster. I may be prejudiced, but to my mind that woman is a genius." "Absolutely," I said. "She's been with me 7 years, and in all that time I've not known her guilty of a single lapse from the highest standard, except once in the winter of 1917, when a purist might have condemned a certain mayonnaise of hers as lacking in creaminess. But one must make allowances. There had been several air raids about that time, and no doubt the poor woman was shaken. But nothing is perfect in this world, Mr. Wooster, and I have had my cross to bear. For 7 years I have lived in constant apprehension lest some evilly disposed person might lure her from my employment. To my certain knowledge she has received offers, lucrative offers, to accept service elsewhere. You may judge of my dismay, Mr. Wooster, when only this morning the bolt fell. She gave notice." "Good Lord!" "Your consternation does credit, if I may say so, to the heart of the author of A Red, Red Summer Rose. But I am thankful to say the worst has not happened. That matter has been adjusted. Jane is not leaving me." "Good egg." "Good egg, indeed, though the expression is not familiar to me. I do not remember having come across it in your books. And, speaking of your books, may I say that what has impressed me about them even more than the moving poignancy of the actual narrative is your philosophy of life. If there were more men like you, Mr. Wooster, London would be a better place." This was dead opposite to my Aunt Agatha's philosophy of life, she having always rather given me to understand that it is the presence in it of chappies like me that makes London more or less of a plague spot. But I let it go. "Let me tell you, Mr. Wooster, that I appreciate your splendid defiance of the outworn fetishes of a purblind social system. I appreciate it. You are big enough to see that rank is but the guinea stamp, and that, in the magnificent words of Lord Bletchmore in Only a Factory Girl, be her origin e'er so humble, a good woman is the equal of the finest lady on earth." I sat up. "I say, do you think that?" "I do, Mr. Wooster. I am ashamed to say that there was a time when I was like other men, a slave to the idiotic convention which we call class distinction. But since I read your books—" I might have known it. Jeeves had done it again. "You think it's all right for a chappie in what you might call a certain social position to marry a girl of what you might describe as the lower classes?" "Most assuredly I do, Mr. Wooster." I took a deep breath and slipped him the good news. "Young Bingo, your nephew, you know, wants to marry a waitress," I said. "I honour him for it," said Old Little. "You don't object?" "On the contrary." I took another deep breath and shifted to the sordid side of the business. "I hope you won't think I'm butting in, don't you know," I said. "But, well, how about it?" "I fear I do not quite follow you." "Well, I mean to say his allowance and all that, the money you're good enough to give him." He was rather hoping that you might see your way to jerking up the total a bit. Old Little shook his head regretfully. I fear that can hardly be managed. You see, a man in my position is compelled to save every penny. I will gladly continue my nephew's existing allowance, but beyond that I cannot go. It would not be fair to my wife. What? But you're not married? Not yet, but I propose to enter upon that holy state almost immediately. The lady, who for years has cooked so well for me, honoured me by accepting my hand this very morning. A cold gleam of triumph came into his eye. Now let him try to get her away from me, he muttered defiantly. Young Mr. Little has been trying frequently during the afternoon to reach you on the telephone, sir, said Jeeves that night when I got home. I bet he has, I said. I had sent poor old Bingo an outline of the situation by messenger boy shortly after lunch. He seemed a trifle agitated. I don't wonder, Jeeves, I said. So brace up and bite the bullet. I'm afraid I've bad news for you. That scheme of yours, reading those books to old Mr. Little and all that, has blown out a fuse. They did not soften him. They did. That's the whole bally trouble. Jeeves, I'm sorry to say that fiancée of yours, Miss Watson, you know, the cook, you know. Well, the long and the short of it is that she's chosen riches instead of honest worth, if you know what I mean. So? She's handed you the mitten and gone and got engaged to old Mr. Little. Indeed, sir. You don't seem much upset. The fact is, sir, I had anticipated some such outcome. I stared at him. And what on earth did you suggest the scheme for? To tell you the truth, sir, I was not wholly averse to a severance of my relations with Miss Watson. In fact, I greatly desired it. I respect Miss Watson exceedingly, but I have seen for a long time that we were not suited. Now, the other young person with whom I have an understanding— Great Scott, Jeeves, there isn't another? Yes, sir. How long's this been going on? For some weeks, sir. I was greatly attracted by her when I first met her at a subscription dance at Camberwell. My sainted aunt, not— Jeeves inclined his head gravely. Yes, sir. By an odd coincidence, it is the same young person that young Mr. Little— I placed the cigarettes on the small table. Good night, sir. Aunt Agatha speaks her mind. I suppose in the case of a chappie of really fine fibre and all that sort of thing, a certain amount of gloom and anguish would have followed this dishing of young Bingo's matrimonial plans. I mean, if mine had been a noble nature, I would have been all broken up. But what with one thing and another, I can't say I let it weigh on me very heavily. The fact that less than a week after he'd had the bad news, I came on young Bingo dancing like an untamed gazelle at Ciro's helped me to bear up. A resilient bird, Bingo. He may be down, but he's never out. While these little love affairs of his are actually on, nobody could be more earnest and blighted. But once the fuse is blown out and the girl has handed him his hat and begged him as a favour never to let her see him again, up he bobs as merry and bright as ever. If I've seen it happen once, I've seen it happen a dozen times. So I didn't worry about Bingo, or about anything else, as a matter of fact. Well, with one thing and another, I can't remember ever having been chirpier than at about this period in my career. Everything seemed to be going right. On 3 separate occasions, horses, in which I'd invested a sizable amount, won by lengths, instead of sitting down to rest in the middle of the race, as horses usually do when I've got money on them. Added to this, the weather continued topping to a degree. My new socks were admitted on all sides to be just the kind that Mother makes. And to round it all off, my Aunt Agatha had gone to France and wouldn't be on hand to snooter me for at least another 6 weeks. And if you knew my Aunt Agatha, you'd agree that that alone was happiness enough for anyone. It suddenly struck me so forcibly one morning while I was having my bath that I hadn't a worry on earth, that I began to sing like a bally nightingale as I sploshed the sponge about. It seemed to me that everything was absolutely for the best in the best of all possible worlds. But have you ever noticed a rummy thing about life? I mean, the way something always comes along to give it you in the neck at the very moment when you're feeling most braced about things in general. No sooner had I dried the old limbs and shoved on the suiting and toddled into the sitting-room than the blow fell. There was a letter from Aunt Agatha on the mantelpiece. "Oh, gosh," I said when I'd read it. "So?" said Jeeves. He was fooling about in the background on some job or other. "It's from my Aunt Agatha, Jeeves. Mrs. Gregson, you know." "Yes, sir." "Oh, you wouldn't speak in that light, careless tone if you knew what was in it," I said with a hollow, mirthless laugh. "The curse has come upon us, Jeeves. She wants me to go and join her at, what's the name of the dash place, at Roville-sur-Mer. Oh, hang it all." "I'd better be packing, sir." "I suppose so." To people who don't know my Aunt Agatha, I find it extraordinarily difficult to explain why it is that she's always put the wind up me to such a frightful extent. I mean, I'm not dependent on her financially or anything like that. It's simply personality, I've come to the conclusion. You see, all through my childhood, and when I was a kid at school, she was always able to turn me inside out with a single glance, and I haven't come out from under the fluence yet. We run to height a bit in our family, and there's about 5'9" of Aunt Agatha, topped off with a beaky nose, an eagle eye, and a lot of grey hair, and the general effect is pretty formidable. Anyway, it never even occurred to me for a moment to give her the miss in baulk on this occasion. If she said I must go to Roville, it was all over except buying the tickets. What's the idea, Jeeves? I wonder why she wants me." "I could not say, sir." Well, it was no good talking about it. The only gleam of consolation, the only bit of blue among the clouds, was the fact that at Roville I should at last be able to wear the rather fruity cummerbund I'd bought 6 months ago, and had never had the nerve to put on. One of those silk contrivances, you know, which you tie round your waist instead of a waistcoat. Something on the order of a sash, only more substantial. I'd never been able to muster up the courage to put it on so far, for I knew that there would be trouble with Jeeves when I did, it being a pretty brightish scarlet. Still, at a place like Roville, presumably dripping with the gaiety and joie de vivre of France, it seemed to me that something might be done. Roville, which I reached early in the morning, after a beastly choppy crossing and a jerky night in the train, is a fairly nifty spot where a chappie without encumbrances in the shape of aunts might spend a somewhat genial week or so. It's like all those French places, mainly sands and hotels and casinos. The hotel which had had the bad luck to draw Aunt Agatha's custom was the Splendide. By the time I got there wasn't a member of the staff who didn't seem to be feeling it deeply. I sympathized with them. I've had experience of Aunt Agatha at hotels before. Of course, the real rough work was all over when I arrived, but I couldn't tell by the way everyone grovelled before her that she'd started by having her first room changed, because it hadn't got a southern exposure, and her next because it had a creaking wardrobe, and that she'd said her say on the subject of the cooking, the waiting, the chambermaiding, and everything else, with perfect freedom and candour. She'd got the whole gang nicely under control by now. The manager, a whiskered cove who looked like a bandit, simply tied himself into knots whenever she looked at him. All this triumph had produced a sort of grim geniality in her, and she was almost motherly when we met. "I'm so glad you're able to come, Bertie," she said. "The air will do you so much good, far better for you than spending your time in stuffy London nightclubs." "Oh, I said. "You'll meet some pleasant people, too. I want to introduce you to Miss Hemingway and her brother, who've become great friends of mine. I'm sure you'll like Miss Hemingway. A nice, quiet girl, so different from so many of the bold girls one meets in London nowadays. Her brother is curate at Chipley in the Glen in Dorsetshire. He tells me they are connected with the Kent Hemingways. Very good family. She is a charming girl." I had a grim foreboding of an awful doom. All this boosting was so unlike Aunt Agatha, who normally is one of the most celebrated right and left-hand knockers in London society. I felt a clammy suspicion, and, by Jove, I was right. "Ellen Hemingway," said Aunt Agatha, "is just the girl I should like to see you marry, Bertie. You ought to be thinking of getting married. Marriage might make something of you. And I could not wish you a better wife than dear Aline. She would be such a good influence in your life." "Here, I say," I chipped in at this juncture, chilled to the marrow. "Bertie," said Aunt Agatha, dropping the motherly manner for a bit and giving me the cold eye, Yes, but I say, it is young men like you, Bertie, who make the person with the future of the race at heart despair. Cursed with too much money, you fritter away in idle selfishness a life which might have been made useful, helpful, and profitable. You do nothing but waste your time on frivolous pleasures. You are simply an antisocial animal, a drone. Bertie, it is imperative that you marry. But, dash it all, yes, you should be breeding children to— No, really, I say, please, I said, blushing richly. Aunt Agatha belongs to 2 or 3 of these women's clubs, and she keeps forgetting she isn't in the smoking room. Bertie, she resumed, and would no doubt have hauled up her slacks at some length, had we not been interrupted. Ah, here they are, she said. Aline, dear. And I perceived a girl and a chappie bearing down on me, smiling in a pleased sort of manner. I want you to meet my nephew Bertie Wooster, said Aunt Agatha. He's just arrived. Such a surprise. I had no notion that he intended coming to Roville. I gave the couple the wary up and down, feeling rather like a cat in the middle of a lot of hounds. Sort of trapped feeling, you know what I mean? An inner voice was whispering that Bertram was up against it. The brother was a small round cove with a face rather like a sheep. He wore pince-nez, his expression was benevolent, and he had on one of those collars which button at the back. "Welcome to Roville, Mr. Wooster," he said. "Oh, Sidney," said the girl. "Doesn't Mr. Wooster remind you of Canon Blenkinsop, who came to Chipley to preach last Easter?" "My dear, the resemblance is most striking." They peered at me for a while as if I was something in a glass case, and I goggled back and had a good look at the girl. No doubt about it, she was different from what Aunt Agatha had called the bold girls one meets in London nowadays. No bobbed hair and gaspers about her. I don't know when I met anybody who looked so respectable, is the only word. She had on a kind of plain dress, and her hair was plain, and her face was sort of mild and saint-like. I don't pretend to be a Sherlock Holmes or anything of that order, but the moment I looked at her, I said to myself, the girl plays the organ in a village church. Well, we gazed at one another for a bit, and there was a certain amount of chit-chat, and then I tore myself away. But before I went, I'd been booked up to take brother and the girl for a nice drive that afternoon, and the thought of it depressed me to such an extent that I felt there was only one thing to be done. I went straight back to my room, dug out the cummerbund, and draped it round the old Tom. I turned round, and Jeeves shied like a startled mustang. "I beg your pardon, sir," he said in a sort of hushed voice. "You're surely not proposing to appear in public in that thing?" "The cummerbund?" I said in a careless, debonair way, passing it off. "Oh, rather." "I should not advise it, sir, really, I shouldn't." "Why not?" "The effect, sir, is loud in the extreme." I tackled the blighter squarely. I mean to say, nobody knows better than I do that Jeeves is a mastermind and all that, but dash it, a fellow must call his soul his own. You can't be a serf to your valet. Besides, I was feeling pretty low, and the cummerbund was the only thing which could cheer me up. "You know, the trouble with you, Jeeves," I said, "is that you're what's the word I want? Too insular. You can't realize that you aren't in Piccadilly all the time. In a place like this, a bit of colour and touch of the poetic is expected of you. Why, I've just seen a fellow downstairs in a morning suit of yellow velvet." "Nevertheless, sir—" "Jeeves," I said firmly, "my mind is made up. I'm feeling a little low-spirited and need cheering. Besides, what's wrong with it? This cummerbund seems to me to be called for. I consider that it has rather a Spanish effect, a touch of the Hidalgo, sort of Vicente y Blasco, what's-his-name stuff, the jolly old Hidalgo off to the bullfight." "Very good, sir," said Jeeves coldly. Dashed upsetting, this sort of thing. If there's one thing that gives me the pip, it's unpleasantness in the home, and I could see that relations were going to be pretty fairly strained for a while. And coming on top of Aunt Agatha's bombshell about the Hemingway girl, I don't mind confessing it made me feel more or less as though nobody loved me. The drive that afternoon was about as mouldy as I'd expected. The curate chappie prattled on of this and that. The girl admired the view, and I got a headache early in the proceedings, which started at the soles of my feet and got worse all the way up. I tottered back to my room to dress for dinner, feeling like a toad under the harrow. If it hadn't been for that cummerbund business earlier in the day, I could have sobbed on Jeeves's neck and poured out all my troubles to him. Even as it was, I couldn't keep the thing entirely to myself. "I say, Jeeves," I said. "Sir?" "Mix me a stiffish brandy and soda." "Yes, sir." "Stiffish, Jeeves. Not too much soda, but splash the brandy about a bit." "Very good, sir." After imbibing, I felt a shade better. "Jeeves," I said. "Sir?" "I rather fancy I'm in the soup, Jeeves." "Indeed, sir?" I eyed the man narrowly. Dashed aloof his manner was, still brooding over the cummerbund. "Yes, right up to the hocks," I said, suppressing the pride of the Woosters and trying to induce him to be a bit matier. "Have you seen a girl popping about here with a parson brother?" "Miss Hemingway, sir." "Yes, sir." "Aunt Agatha wants me to marry her." "Indeed, sir." "Well, what about it, sir? I mean, have you anything to suggest?" "No, sir." The blighter's manner was so cold and unchummy that I bit the bullet and had a dash at being airy. "Oh, well, tra-la-la," I said. "Precisely, sir," said Jeeves. And that was, so to speak, that.